Hello everyone, welcome to section 1 of the Seacoast Wrap Knit Along. So we are going to be starting here today. We are going to cast on, we are going to work the beachy wedge all the way to here. Now keep in mind that this is knit on the bias, so we are going to start here, increase on both sides until we get to the appropriate place to start section 2. The beachy wedge is starting with color A. I have chosen a silvery linen yarn for my color A. It is a little bit finer of a yarn than the yarn that was knit in the sample. So this will likely have a slightly different drape, a slightly different texture. I did a small swatch since I'm not really concerned about fit necessarily. This isn't a fitted item. It is a very small swatch. It is primarily to look at the drape of the fabric, how it reacts when it's washed and dried. This was machine washed, machine dried, and I actually quite like it. It softened up quite nicely. So I'm going to use the same size needles as called for in the pattern. I'll be using my favorite. I like Chiagoo, mostly because of the feel of the needles. To me, they feel like butter when you're knitting. So as you can see from the sample here, you're going to be starting at this corner. Sorry, I had it backwards. This corner and knitting this direction. So you can see there is a garter stitch border here on both sides. You can see the texture lines that are running through. And you can see how much this wool, since this is a 75% merino and 25% nylon, this bloomed quite a bit after it was blocked. So keep in mind, if you have chosen a different type of fabric to work with, if you have chosen silk, if you have chosen wool, this will react a little bit differently, and your particular wrap may have a little bit different drape. So to start, after I cast on, the first part of this is going to be establishing the garter stitch border on the edges. So for the cast on, it doesn't really matter what kind you're doing, since this is not really going to be any edge that needs stretch and there's so few stitches to cast on. We'll be casting on 4 and working from there. So for the first row, and every single row after that actually, you're going to be slipping the first stitch. This creates a nice edge on both sides. And we'll be increasing on the right side on every single edge for right now. So we are knitting front back. We are using increases that consume a stitch. Please keep that in mind. And we will knit to the last stitch. And that starts the entire shawl. So row 2 in all even rows for right now. You are going to be working in stocking stitch. But for right now, we're still in the garter stitch border. So we will slip one, adjust our yarn a little bit. Now you're supposed to knit through the last 4 stitches, so we have knitted until the last 4 stitches. We do not have any room in which to purl because we have not increased enough stitches yet. So we are just going to knit across. Okay. Row 3, 5, 7, and 9, we are still establishing this garter stitch border. So we'll be continuing to increase, and you should always have an even number here. We'll be continuing to increase until we have enough space in the background with the garter edges on both sides until we can start that texture stitch. So I'm going to increase to that point and then check back in when we get to row 11. Alright, so I've completed up to row 10. I'm about ready to start row 11. So you can see the garter stitch border on both sides, and we've started that stockinette background in the middle here. So rows 11 through 14 are the main repeat rows for this section. We'll continue increasing on both sides, but this starts that texture pattern throughout these middle stitches. So for row 11, we are going to still slip the first stitch. We are still going to increase in that following stitch with a knit front back. We're going to keep our garter stitch border. And keep in mind in the directions, when you see a slip 1, knit front back, knit 2, or a knit 2, knit front back, knit 1, that is always going to be this garter stitch border here. That's why those are called out separately. So then we are going to start the repeat across. So we will knit another 2, and now we purl 2, knit 2 across until we hit the last 4 stitches. And for row 11, that's 1 repeat here, because now I have 4 stitches, so I'll start the garter stitch border by the knit 2, knit front back, knit the last stitch. Okay? And then the even rows, like we said before, are always going to be the same, so we will keep our 4 stitch garter stitch border, purl across, and that'll create those garter stitch ridges, and then keep our garter stitch border on this side as well. Row 13 is very similar, but we are trying to offset this garter stitch ridge. So let's work row 12 here quick, so we can go over 13 as well. Generally a Portuguese knitter, so throwing is a little bit interesting today for some reason. Alright. So, for row 13, it is very similar to row 11. We will keep that same garter stitch border with the increase. And then we will immediately start a knit 2, purl 2 repeat across. So as you can see here, since we increased by 1, this will be a purl stitch, and then the one right next to it started that garter stitch ridge in row 11. So we'll always be offset by 1. And now I have run out. I have 4 stitches left, so I will do our normal increase in the garter stitch border. And then row 14 is the same as every other even row, and that will keep with our garter stitch border, purl across, and then have our garter stitch border. So once we get a few more rows into it, you will see these ridges start to form here. So that is the basic of our section 1, the beachy wedge. You will continue doing this until you have enough stitches as called for in the pattern. Please keep in mind that you will repeat all 4 rows until you get to 102 stitches, and then you're going to repeat rows 11 and 12 to get to 104 to the right number of stitches. So keep going until you get to your number of stitches. Now if you want to make your shawl wider, you'll be increasing additional times. Now, if you wanted to do that, please keep in mind that everything after this is still a 4-stitch repeat. So you want to make sure that you are increasing to something that is divisible by 4, otherwise you're not going to be able to follow the same pattern directions. So with that being said, please post any questions you have or comments you have in the comment section. If you want to share some pictures of your progress, feel free to do so. Please feel free to do that as well. And we will be putting out a update thread every Wednesday for you to share pictures or post any comments in the meantime, and then videos come out every 2 weeks. So I will see you next Wednesday with an update thread, and then the Wednesday after that for the video for section 2. See you guys Wednesday!